Okay, so today we're going to look at who I am. I've always wondered about my roots. I was told when I was a young boy that Seidelbach, my last name, didn't exist. It was made up at Ellis Island by the immigration officer because he couldn't understand my grandfather when he came over. So it really made me curious. And then all of a sudden, some things started happening in my life, which I'll explain. And before you know it, I've been doing a whole bunch of searching on my Jewish roots. So let's take a look at the Jewish condition. We could start with 2 Kings 17, 7 through 23. And this is where God uh, evicts the northern kingdom being Israel from Judah. Judah was the southern kingdom, but Israel was kicked out of the land because they did not turn away from the gods that they had created. It wasn't Adonai, it was other gods. And so until in verse 23, Adonai banished Israel from his presence as he spoke by the hand of all of his servants, the prophets. So Israel has been exiled from their own land to Assyria to this day. And that's to this day, yeah. And then in First Chronicles 5:26, God stirred up the spirit of the king of Assyria, and he carries away the others. He takes them all, and the ones that were on the other side of the Jordan, and he takes them out. And then in Deuteronomy, among those nations you will find no rest. There will be no rest for the sole of your foot, but there Adonai will give you a trembling heart and a failing eyes and a despairing spirit. The exile of Judah began to Babylon for 70 years. Then they got to come back. They rebuilt the temple. They had many years again until the year 70 AD, when the temple was again destroyed and a big war ensued. And in 135 AD, Israel is kicked out of the land. 135 AD, they're sent away from the land. A small minority got to stay, but as you can see, here's the diaspora. The diaspora is the exile. It's a Greek word. We call it the galut. Galut is a Jewish word, a Hebrew word for exile. But they're kicked out of Jerusalem. Many went to the southern route through Africa and ended up in Carthage, and then another group took off and ended up in Rome and Italy, and went to Spain and Northern Europe. Another group went to Syria and Turkey and up into Russia. And another group went back to Babylon and around and probably ended up in India and China. These routes are very difficult, but by the year 500, Spain and Europe, and then by 700, the Muslims came to Spain because the Jews invited them, because the Jews who were living there were persecuted by the Vandals and the Visigoths. And by the 1400s, the Muslims were kicked out as the Vandals got themselves to become Catholic and reinvaded and kicked out the Muslims. So as you can see, there are many, many wanderings and movements due to migration and expulsion. And wherever they went, conditions were bad for the Jews. They were all over the place. They even got resent from Poland. If you notice there, they went up to Lithuania, and then they got taken down to the Black Sea. There was a lot of them sold into slavery in Constantinople. That was the headquarters. And so the people from Poland, and then they ended up back in Poland, a lot of them. So it was like a circuitous thing. That's where you get the term wandering Jews. Okay, these are cities with large communities of Jewish people. As you can see, they're scattered all over Europe. It's just terrible. In 1492, let's go to Spain. Then in Spain, in 1492, conditions got really bad for Jews. They were kicked out. of their country. They were expelled from Spain in 1492 on the day we call Tisha B'Av. And so they left um, Spain the same day that Columbus sailed for America. It's thought that Columbus is a Jewish person because his whole crew is mostly Jewish. Um, they left Spain in 1492. A lot of them went to Portugal, and they lived in Portugal and then got kicked out of Portugal in 1497. Some went towards America, some headed towards United Kingdom, some went back to Spain and out of there. And they ended up in Monaco and Algeria and Tunisia and Sicily and Rome, in those places. That's where they went from Spain, and they left and they went to France. It was just terrible the way Jews were. And then they were in the other area, Eastern Europe, they were all over the place too, as you can see. These are late migrations, Jewish communities still existing in Turkey. And so we come to me, born in Brooklyn, New York in 1946. Wow. There I am at Coney Island on the beach. And made a nice, good looking boy there, didn't it? Was raised by my grandma and grandpa and my two aunts. I was going to be a cowboy when I grew up. There's one of my aunts, Aunt Martha. And, they raised me. This is my grandma, grandpa, and two aunts. Grandpa was in the middle. My dad is on the far end there next to one of my aunts. My grandmother is next to my other aunt, Martha, and my other aunt, Frances. So that was my family. That's my grandma and grandpa as they got older. But, like I said, I was told there's no other name. But Seidelbach, according to the guy at Ellis Island, changed their name. So there's our tombstones for my two grandma and grandpa. They died. Grandma died in my arm when I was 15. Grandma Augusta, Grandma Gussie. They used to call it Grandma Gussie. And February 17th, 1962, she died in my arms. And they're buried in the same cemetery in Queens, New York, as Rabbi Schneerson. Rabbi Schneerson, as you may or may not know, was proclaimed to be the Messiah. He was the head of the Lubavitcher Hasidic cult, and he died in 1995. And since he left no heir, they assumed he was the last of the line, so he was the Messiah. And so they go visit his grave every day in this cemetery here. And I came to visit the grave. I've been there twice, and every time I come there, I come to see two famous people, not him. I come to see these two. And, that's my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandfather loved me. He took care of me. He used to take me to Coney Island and places like that. And they raised me till I was 8 years old. And then we moved in with my Aunt Martha. So then what happens in now I don't remember the year, but I always asked where my mother was. And they said she died in childbirth. And then in 1965, she comes looking for me. But my dad says that he wouldn't tell her where I was. I was in the Air Force at the time. And so I was stationed in Arkansas, so he wouldn't tell her where I was, and he wouldn't tell me about her, except that she didn't die in childbirth. So I was very mad and angry for a lot of years. And then in 1988, I mean, this has gone on. I looked for her, I couldn't find her. Um, I get a letter from the Salvation Army Missing Persons Bureau. And if you'd like to talk to your sister, please call this number. So I called this number, and there's my new family. That's my mother and my 5 brothers and sisters, 2 brothers, 3 sisters, all half, of course, um, and me. And so we got together in 1989 when this picture was taken. Uh, so I got to meet my other family, my mother's side of the family. I was thrilled, but now I have 2 families, and I didn't know what to do. I was very angry. I had to work it out, and I worked it out, and I had to forgive my dad and all those other relatives about what happened. So I did. Anyway, in 1998, I get an email from a guy named Gil Seidelbach. He wants to tell me, he wants to know if we're related. And so I read this email was a new thing then. So he was living in Israel. And I wrote back and related my name of my grandfather. And he said, we're cousins. And so in 1998, I was happening to go to Israel. And so since I was going to Israel, I wanted to visit them. So I got to visit them when I was in Israel, and got to stay at their house for 3 days and 3 nights, me and my wife, and got to meet my entire family. There was some great people there, including Natan Zak, who just recently died. He's the poet laureate of Israel for a time. Anyway, when I was going to Israel in Brooklyn, I met these 2 aunts that I had named Lily and Sadie. Now, Lily Salinger and Sadie Cohen. And I got to spend time with them, and they told me the story of why our family got separated from the rest of the family, because there was a black sheep story in my family. My grandfather, turns out, is not my grandfather. So I got a new grandfather. His name is Yankel, or Jake. Jake was my biological grandfather. He married my grandmother. I have his birth certificate. I have the marriage license copy of it. And so it turns out that Jake died young, fell down a flight of stairs, and Norbert, who was the other grandfather I knew, married Jake's widow, Gussie. And so they had a child named Francis. So interesting life. I guess we could make a movie out of it. So anyway, the whole family tree now shows up from Israel. This is my grandmother and grandfather, Jake, and I guess on their wedding day, I'm supposing. Pretty nice stuff. Anyway, my family shows up, the whole tree shows up, the Israeli side, and everybody, it shows up that we're all descended from somebody that lived in Poland, who was my great grandfather. His name was Elisha, Elisha. And my grandfather had 6 brothers and sisters, 2 on the other side with his first wife. Elisha had 2 wives. He didn't have much to do, I guess, except stay at home and have babies. He had a lot of children, and 6 brothers and sisters for my grandfather, 2 on one side, on the other side with his first wife. And he had given birth to 2 famous people, Abraham Brill and Natan Zak. Abraham Brill was an amazing man. He translated all of Freud's works into English. He ran the Department of Psychiatry at Columbia University. Natan Zak, of course, was the poet laureate of Israel. Abraham Brill paid for my grandfather's brother Max to come over to the United States, and then he paid for my grandfather Jake to come to the United States. So they each had to get money from them. From Abraham Brill was able to do that. Well, anyway, I got to visit Israel in 1998, which was their Jubilee year. So it's pretty amazing. So then I find out we're from Poland, but we're not really from Poland because the marriage license says we're from Austria. So a very confusing life I've had. Then letters started coming in to my house. Family shows up. You know, this is the Seidelbach that didn't exist. The one Ellis Island said doesn't exist. I got a whole family in France. There's this guy named Charles Seidelbach, and he sends me a big tube. And I open this tube, and it just stretches across the dining room, and it's a family tree of France. 600 names on this tree. Then there's people from Israel tell me there's people in Canada, there's people in Brazil, there's people in Australia and Hungary. And I got to meet or talk to some of these people myself, and it's amazing. So all of a sudden this family shows up. Then I get a first cousin from my father's family, had an older brother named Nathan, who I'm named after because he died young. He is like 30 years old. He went away from the family. He did denounce his Judaism. He went to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he married this girl. And he had a child, and her name was Rosalie. So now she's a first cousin. She lives in California. She's about 10 years older than me. And that brings me back to Poland again. My town. Where is it? My town is right here, Przemysl. Przemysl. But it's Przemysl. But you don't pronounce it Przemysl, you pronounce it Przemyśl. So if you want to learn how to speak Polish, I'm really happy with you, because nobody wants to learn how to, that's too hard. But Przemyśl, or Przemysl, I like to say, is a fortress city on a trade route. This is the trade route known as the textile route. And textiles move from the east to the west. You know, in England, and they don't make all these beautiful dresses, stuff like that. They would go through towns, cities like Kiev and Lvov. Lvov was right across the river from Przemysl, Przemysl, and then Krakow, and then they would go, etc. They would just follow the river. Starting in the 1100s to the 1300s, Jews were welcomed in Poland and had to leave Germany and other places due to persecution. The kings had peasants working the land, so no problem there, but they needed the Jewish people to sell the products, to administer, and to collect taxes, etc., you know, to be the middle class. And since they got protected by the princes due to what they did for them. Poland was not Catholic then, but becoming so, and the church became less and less tolerant of the Jewish people. The Polish Constitution ensured freedom of religion. It allowed for national and ethnic minorities to have the right to establish educational and cultural institutions, and it denoted separation of church and state. So they came from Germany mostly, these Jewish people. They settled in Poland for the next 700 years. Wow, amazing, huh? There. So this is the area we call Galicia, and colored in orange there. And Przemysl, or Przemyśl, is in the middle of it. Krakow goes all the way to Krakow. It's about a 2-hour interstate drive nowadays. And goes over into the Ukraine. So Galicia. There's a better shot of it. In the late 1700s, Poland ceased to exist as a country. It was overrun. It was overrun by the Prussians, Austria, and Russia. It was divided up. Galicia was under Austrian control. And then in 1810, the Prussians came in. Well, in order to tax, to draft, and educate the Jewish people, they needed for them to have surnames. Until then, till now, then you were called by your first name. Jewish people usually go, they call you by your first name. My first name is Natan in Hebrew, Natan, and then they would say Ben for son or Bat for daughter. So I would be Natan Ben, and my dad's name was Ariel or Leo. So that was our name. There was no surname. There was no last names till 1810. The Sephardic or Spanish Jews did this in the 11th and 12th century. They had to get surnames. But many Jews took names denoting they were the son of, like, Goodson, or, or something like that, or the place of where they were living, or the occupations that they had. They were a goldsmith, or an animal, or a bird, or whatever. They were Jewish people named Siegel, or whatever. My family took the name Seidelbach. Bach means stream, and Seidel can either mean half stream, or in German, it's Seidel, meaning beer mug. So who knows what my name means? I'm a half of a beer mug that lives in the stream. Well, anyway, I decided to hire a genealogist if I was going to go to Poland, and I wanted to find out more. We flew to Krakow, Poland, spent one day at Auschwitz, and then this was about 4 years ago, and then I met Dr. Selbulski, who had done research. He was from the University of Krakow. He taught political science, but his hobby was genealogy. Done research from what I sent him, and he drove us to Shemesh on the day two of our trip, about a 2-hour drive. He was a very nice young guy, a Gentile, who lived on a kibbutz for 2 years in Israel. So he understood the Jewish people. He also could speak Yiddish, which was the street language of Europe. So he taught political science and did this on the side. He just wrote a book called After Auschwitz, which I hope to read when it gets translated into English. This is an 1895 map of Shemesh, my hometown. The pink area was the Jewish area mostly. The blow up here shows the Great Synagogue. The Great Synagogue, which was right along the road by the river. Around it were Jewish houses from about the 17th century. He showed me that my family house was number 232, which was right next to the synagogue, right across the street from the Great Synagogue on the right-hand side. Right here. He said that this indicates that my family was very prominent, as the more prominent families lived closer to the synagogue. So the house number 232 is shown on all these birth records that I got. You can see the number 232 is on there. So I got like 60 pages of these things that he downloaded for me, this guy. These are all birth records. There's a little better birth record, but it still shows Seidelbach's being born. There's my grandfather, I think. It also shows me that in each Seidelbach birth, there was a Polish word which signified out of wedlock. So all these Jews were born out of wedlock because Jews only got married in the synagogue and very rarely did a civil marriage or recorded it even there. They didn't show up at the post office to record their or civic duties. Also, there was a Rabbi David Halpern. I don't know where he got to, but you probably can't read all this stuff. But there was a Rabbi David Halpern that was their rabbi at the time, which blew me away because at the Flatbush Park Jewish Center in Brooklyn, New York, when I was bar mitzvahed, my rabbi's name was David Halpern, same exact name. That's amazing. In the 1800s, the population of Poland increased by 7 times. My grandfather, Elisha, was born in 1830, and he had 6 sons and 2 daughters. The economy does not grow, though. So what do you do with all these people? So you take them to the railroad track and put them on a railroad train and send them out on a boat. And the USA opens the door for immigration. In 1880 to 1910, 2.5 million Europeans and 3 million Poles enter the US. This was the restored 1895 railroad station in Shemesh. It was just recently restored when we walked through it, that my grandpa Yankel saw, and I see it as he exactly saw it the day he left, 1905. It cost $100 to travel to the USA then. So many families sent one who helped pay the way for more, and Abraham Brill was the first, like I told you. Then Max, then Yankel. All 6 of our side got to come here. One had a number tattooed on her arm. She was a survivor of Auschwitz. The other side of the family went elsewhere, including Israel in 1936. So far, I've also documented 68 family members who died in the Holocaust. If you're interested in doing this kind of research, you can go to these websites and do some research. I love the jewishgen.org free, and ancestry.com I think costs money, but jewishgen.org, you can do their database searches for free. Just type in your name and they'll look, see where the families are. Well, we got to go to Shemesh, like I said, and in Shemesh there's 2 cemeteries. One was run over and destroyed by the Nazis, and another was preserved by the Jewish community in Warsaw. They helped pay to preserve it. Beautiful. Now, the problem with the cemeteries is that the old tombstones were made out of sandstone. And the sandstone doesn't last, but Tomas, our tour guide, told me Saddlebacks were buried in both cemeteries. So we were standing on holy Saddleback ground, I guess. 41, the slide is a synagogue that's today standing in Shemesh, and it's also being used. It's this other side of the building. And here's another synagogue that's now a bottling distributor. The house is gone. Number 232 is no more, but this is where my family lived. This is the street. It was a very emotional experience for me to stand there. This is exactly where the house was. Can't tell you how I felt. If you want to do this, here is who to contact. Tomas Cybulski. This is his website. He owns a company called Poland Travel. He can take you on any kind of Polish trip you want. He does private tours all over Poland. Amazing guy. I'll just hold up here for a second so you can write it down. And then This is my own website that I have. I set it up myself under a group called tribalpages.com. I pay for it every year, and I get to put in all these names and stuff. I put in all those names so far. There's lots of people on there. That's my website. So that's my journey. That's my journey. I hope you enjoyed it. And if there's any other further information, you can always contact me. God bless you. Have a good day. Shalom, shalom.